know what really makes us mad? Is wasting money on CDs with only one or two good songs.
Yeah. Tell them about punk.
What's up, posers, and welcome to Punk Lotto Pod. I'm your co-host, Justin Hensley.
I'm your other co-host, Dylan Hensley.
This is the show where we choose 1 year at random and select one punk, hardcore, emo, or punk-adjacent album from that year to discuss as we talk out of the sides of our mouths.
All they do is snark.
Snark and laugh and talk out the sides of their mouth. Yeah. Not really going to address it other than that. It's just funny to reference it. Today we are talking about an album released in the year 1984, which was my turn to select. But before we get into that, if you head to patreon.com/punklautopod, that's where you get access to all of our weekly bonus audio for just $1. Last week we did a 2-in-1, I'm Listening News of the World. We have a $5 producer tier, which gets your name set on the show every single week. So shout out to our producers. Let's start with Steve Long, host of the podcast Rebel Nerd Radio. Shout out to Jason W., writer of the newsletter Weird Alone Guy Industries, which also includes the Songs About Chocolate and Girls newsletter. Shout out to Zach in Oregon, who has the Instagram profile Pacific Northwest Punk Hall of Fame. And shout out to Dave Brown, writer of the newsletter Oklahoma Lefty, and now the returning One Band, 5 Songs. Dave has recorded a new episode, and we should be getting one soon. So excited that Dave is back in the podcasting realm. Dave and I did do an episode of Bookenders last weekend as well, which should be dropping this week. And producers also get to vote in the exclusive poll once a month, where you determine what we talk about on our Extra Play bonus audio. And we have a $10 tier that you choose the album we devote an entire episode to. All right, we are back in the swing of things. Dylan returned last week, so we were able to kind of get back to the way the show normally does. But we've got some more guest lists coming up. I have 3 tentatively scheduled, no hard dates for it, but excited on all of those. Especially one's a big one too. That'll be exciting. But yeah, we're back in the groove. And this week we are talking about 1984, and of course we like to take a look at the albums released in 1984. So Dylan, what is going on in '84? What were you doing in '84?
I was not born yet. Yeah.
Same.
Yeah, so 1984, it's kind of an interesting year, and I think it will maybe get more interesting as we talk closer to the record that we're going to talk about. But this is a pretty significant year for jangle pop and some alt-rock stuff. On the jangle pop side, we've got the Smiths' self-titled record. We've got 2 Felt albums. The Go-Betweens have a record. And then, I guess this is early enough to call them fully a jangle pop band, but R.E.M. put out Reckoning. But certainly they straddle that line and would go on to be, one of the primary architects of American alt-rock.
College Rock was specifically referencing them.
Yeah. So, on that note, R.E.M.'s contemporaries would also include The Replacements, putting out Let It Be. Violent Femmes have a record called Hallowed Ground. That one's very early in their discography. I don't remember exactly which one that is.
I think it's the second one.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Because I think the third one's called 3, so that helps.
Meat Puppets put out their second record. I didn't look too much into cowpunk in general in this year, but certainly there's plenty more where that came from. And alt-rock radio mainstays, the Red Hot Chili Peppers, put out their self-titled debut album.
Weren't they still like I don't know what that first record sounds like. Weren't they still a punk band at this stage? I know they started as a punk band.
I thought they were like always doing the funk rock thing.
I mean,
that
maybe
one's definitely got a lot of rap and funk on it.
Yeah. I mean, maybe every LP does, and just like anything punk and hardcore was the pre-LP stuff, maybe. But they started in the punk scene. But they might have been funky all along, too.
Yeah. Produced by Andy Gill of Gang of Four, by the way.
What? Weird.
Speaking of Gang of Four, and post-punk is certainly a pretty big thing, and we've got your varying shades of goth to describe that sound, but Echo and the Bunnymen put out Ocean Rain, The Cure put out The Top, Susie and the Banshees put out Hyena. Public Image Limited put out This Is What You Want, This Is What You Get. Nick Cave record. Pretty early Bad Seeds record. Post-birthday party. From Here to Eternity. Not Infirmary.
I also thought it was From Her.
Yeah, it probably is.
That record's okay. I don't really care for early Bad Seeds. I weirdly like the middle period of the Bad Seeds the most. Mostly the 90s stuff. Early 2000s, maybe.
Yeah, I don't really care for Nick Cave, actually.
I mean...
I've tried.
Yeah, I get it.
I just can't fully get into it. I have less reason now.
Yeah, he's weird.
Annoying, yeah.
Yeah, he complains about cancel culture a lot. And it's just like, I hate when guys complain about cancel culture. It's like, you're fine. No one is trying to cancel Nick Cave. But when you complain about cancel culture, it makes people want to cancel you. So shut up.
It's a big year for big music.
Yeah, literally.
Yeah, we've got U2's Unforgettable Fire. The Waterboys put out A Pagan Place. Midnight Oil put out Red Sails in the Sunset. Big Country put out Steel Town. The Alarm put out Declaration. You could even kind of throw that Echo and the Bunnymen record in there. Big music adjacent.
Yeah. Yeah, Echo is a funny band because like they kind of get called goth a lot, but they're not particularly spooky.
They had the big teased hair.
Yeah. They looked like The Cure is really what it was.
Yeah.
And they played post-punk.
Yeah. Echo would also be cited as, a major influence on shoegaze, so they always get that kind of proto-shoegaze thing.
They get like psychedelic rock tags too.
Speaking of psychedelic rock tags, they're still new wave in 1984. We've got XTC's
Not so new.
The Big Express. We've got Mirror Moves by Psychedelic Furs. And there's kind of the closer you get to mainline punk, because a lot of this stuff is pretty ancillary. Also like garagey stuff, like Hoodoo Gurus, The Gun Club, put out the Las Vegas Story. Yeah, but like the closer you get to maybe more of the main trunk of punk, the punk genre tree, it kind of gets scattered in 84, and it's a little odd. We've got some non-subgenre punk, and even that's kind of a stretch. I mean, Ramones put out Too Tough to Die. That's a hardcore-leaning Ramones record. Naked Ray Gun put out Throb Throb, and they always have had that noise rock association.
Yeah, because of Santiago Domingo being in Big Black.
And just their tone being so abrasive, too.
Yeah, and Throb Throb is probably like one of the more hardcore records too in their catalog, so you could have almost stuck it in the hardcore section, but it makes sense to be here because then you would have nothing else
yeah.
besides the Ramones.
Yeah, which I mean, I could just throw that out there that there's a Ramones record, but on the note of noise rock, Flipper put out Gone Fishin', which we infamously reviewed on this show pretty early on. Swans put out Cop.
Wah.
Killdozer put out Intellectuals Are the Shoeshine Boys of the Ruling Elite, which I think is a really fun album title.
Not to go back to Swans, but really, to me, now all they are is just Insane Johnny cowboy hat posts that say Swans on them. Yeah, like I don't even care about... That's what they are now, a hat meme.
And...
Oh, wow. I would almost say you could have put this in our also ran section, but I guess not on this record. Maybe if it was the next one.
I thought about that. It's less so on the record that we're talking about, but in relation to this band, for sure. And I almost didn't include this section, but I knew I kind of had to. But 84, we've got a notable amount of death rock. And in terms of punk subgenres... Well, before I get into death rock, I'll mention here hardcore. I didn't put this band in the also ran because I don't think they really fit, but Agnostic Front put out Victim in Pain. And that's probably one of the few notable kind of straightforward hardcore records in this year.
Yeah, there is an argument that I saw online that people were saying that hardcore dies in 84. Stephen Blush in American Hardcore says it dies at 86, but I do see what the argument people are saying for 84 is. it'll make more sense when we do talk about the records that are closer to this one, but yeah, it's a light year for hardcore.
Yeah. So, kind of off of that, there's almost like this fusion of hardcore and goth rock happening, and that's where we get death rock in a lot of ways. So that's really like the big thing in 84, and it's not like a huge thing, but in terms of like having a consistent sort of sound or scene that's really developing at this time, that's about the only thing that works, categorically. We're very in between waves of hardcore.
Yeah, like crossover's not even really a thing yet.
Not really, no. Thrash is barely a thing.
Yeah. That's where a lot of the hardcore did disappear to, was crossover.
Yeah. But like, we've got TSOL's Change Today, some Christian Death, some Alien Sex Fiend, and Sam Hain's Initium. So we'll talk again. We'll come back around to this point on hardcore, because that is what we're talking about on this record. But what did you almost pick?
I almost picked all hardcore stuff, if you noticed. Yes, so it was an interesting year. I kind of wanted to go in the lane of records I didn't know, or at least didn't know super duper well. And so I was picking stuff. I was like, these are kind of weird records. We've never covered these bands. I thought they'd be interesting to talk about. The one I first considered was Corrosion of Conformity. It was their first LP, Eye for an Eye. And a couple things. This is the first LP, so I don't even know if it's necessarily even the most hardcore thing they did. I think they had an EP that came out before that more people cite as a bigger hardcore record. But it's funny. It got me thinking. I was like, I don't know anyone from North Carolina who really reps Corrosion of Conformity very hard, which is surprising because they are kind of our only major 80s hardcore band. Like, we had them, but none of them were huge. Like, the second biggest one was like The Cigarettes, and like, because that was the dude who like produced that early Bad Brain stuff, and he was like their tour manager. But like, we didn't have a ton. There were bands, but we didn't have a ton of them. And Corrosion of Conformity is a band that's like big, but I feel like they're almost more known for being a metal band than they are for actually being a hardcore band. It's one of those weird ones where it's like, and they were there too, and it was like, I don't know anyone who really loves Corrosion of Conformity. I don't. Maybe it's because they're not from the part of the state that I live, but I know people from that area, and they don't really talk about COC. Maybe, again, because they went so, like, metal. Especially, like, sludge metal, like they turned into at some point. I don't know. Do you know any COC fans, really? I know they exist, but...
Yeah, no, not really. Not even among metal fans. Like, I've never really encountered anybody that was like, I love Corrosion of Conformity. I don't know. They don't get talked about.
Yeah. I don't... Is it because they're not actually that good? I'm wondering if that's what it is.
Well, yeah, what I've heard of them, I don't really think I like them, so that's possible.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like it's a case of, like, you know how the Addicts are still around, and people are like, yeah, they were legends. It's like, they're not really legends. They were around for a really long time. I guess it's you stick around long enough, you just get grandfathered in as important.
I mean, their sludge stuff, the southern metal stuff, the stoner metal stuff, is pretty well regarded.
Yeah. But it wasn't original. You know, I Hate God and Crowbar were already doing it.
Yeah.
Before them. Yeah. I don't know. I figured this would be likely the only COC record we would ever consider covering, because they go metal pretty quickly.
The next one's definitely a crossover. Animosity.
Yeah. I mean, we can do a crossover record. I'm not anti-crossover, because it's a hardcore genre.
Yeah.
But that record isn't even as well-regarded as this one, I don't think. So, I don't know. I think that EP, honestly, is the most well-regarded hardcore thing they put out. I also considered Identity by Marginal Man. And it's funny, Marginal Man have like a emo-core, emotional hardcore tag on Rate Your Music. And this came out in 1984, which kind of implies that Marginal Man beat Rites of Spring and Embrace to the emo-core record. Now, Rites of Spring, I think, starts in 83. So I think this is just a case of, like, The Damned just put out the punk record first in the UK. So it's just, like, a funny timing thing. And also, they probably weren't calling themselves emo-core, emotional hardcore. I think that's a later tag that's being applied. So
No,
it's very,
yeah.
they
were just doing a continuation of DC hardcore. Yeah, it's like Marginal Man and Scream.
Yeah.
Really kind of are the predecessors.
Yeah. And like I've seen Marginal Man's records on these lists for years, and I was like, I don't really know any of them very well. And I don't, because they're one of those bands too that like it's made up of members of like Artificial Peace and Red Sea, and it's just kind of like, oh, it's like the other DC guys is really what it is.
Yeah, Assault and Battery had like a government issue member in it at one point.
Yeah, it's
and
like
that
none
was
of
like
the
a band that never. They were on a comp in '84. You know, like everything else was just like released way, way, way later.
Yeah, I'm trying to pull up really quick who is even in Marginal Man that we would recognize their name, and I don't know if it's even anybody.
Not really. I don't know their name. Steve Polcari, maybe.
Yeah, I feel like I've heard the name Mike Manos, but it might just be only in relation to this band. So yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know this record very well. I don't know their place in the DC scene. I don't think they're a Rev Summer band, but they, sound like they could have been. So yeah, I don't know. I don't even know if they're any good. It's one of those bands. So who knows? And then my last pick was the JFA self-titled Jodie Foster's Army. This was what they were, Arizona band, I think. One of the few. The JFA are like known for being like a skate punk band. I know their logo and I know their album covers, but I don't know their records at all. I've heard songs, but never any albums by them. I don't know. I don't think they're even all that important. I think it's just another case of they were there too. Maybe they're important for skate punk to form an identity because they are really tied to that. Also Agent Orange for some reason. But I don't know. I don't know this stuff. I think the first EP or LP is probably more well regarded, and that would probably be the album to do. But again, this might be another one where the EP is probably the thing to really talk about. Their first EP. I don't know. Don't know my JFA really well, and I kind of picked some of these really just to kind of learn about them more than anything. Is how I was leaning on a lot of my nominations, though.
All right. What did you pick?
Another weird record.
Yeah.
I selected Die Kreuzen's self-titled record. Quick stats on the band. From Milwaukee, Wisconsin. They formed in 1981, and this is the band's debut full-length album. It was released on Touch and Go Records, and the personnel on this album is Keith Brammer on bass, Eric Tunison on drums, Herman, aka Brian Edgeness, on guitar, and Dan Kubinski on vocals. I hope I got pronunciation right on that. Edgeness is the one I didn't really know for sure. It could be a soft G, it could be a hard G, not sure, but I tried. And it was produced by Corey Rusk and engineered by Rick Canzano. And their style of music would be, I guess at this point, you would call them a hardcore band. I don't know what else you would call them at this stage, but they're definitely weird. They're noisy. Noise is definitely an element to their sound. But yeah, hardcore and noise are like the closest other sounds. They do change a lot from record to record, but...
why did you pick this record?
So I had covered their second record, October File. I did an episode of Dance of Days a couple years ago. That was the series I was doing where I was looking at records from 1986 because that was my birth year and I didn't I never thought that 86 was a strong year for records. And I did like a Halloween themed, and I went with like psychobilly, gothy kind of stuff. And I talked about October File on there, and I loved that record. I had a really good time with it. And I was familiar with this one. I'd heard it before, but it wasn't one that I'd heard multiple times. Like it was like maybe like a one-time listen thing. And I wanted to do Die Kreuzen again on the show, though. Like I knew they deserve a look with you as well. And this was their most hardcore record at this point. Like I said, they changed from album to album. They bring in like gothic elements. They turn into like an alternative band, and they have a lot of different kind of stuff going on in their sounds. So I don't know, I wanted to talk about them because I think they're weird. I think they're interesting. I think they're good, and I just wanted to spend some more time with them. I wanted to look more into this record. I wanted to look into their story. I didn't know too much of the story, and Wisconsin bands are weird. I don't know a ton of bands from Wisconsin, but all of the ones I do know, there's something kind of weird about all of them. And I'm not sure if that is scene or geography or what. But yeah, we can dive more into that as well. But do you have any real experience with Die Kreuzen?
Yeah, I've heard October File. It's a weird record.
I really like it, though.
I like it, but I don't love it. I've heard some stuff from Century Days, which is the third record, which is produced by Butch Vig. Mm-hmm. I think that's where they get grungier, more alt-rock leaning. Yeah. October File is like a weird, almost alt-metal record way before that's even a thing. And like, that's kind of my impression of Die Kreuzen, is that they are at like almost every step, like all of their first three records are really ahead. It's very easy to describe, or the first two particularly, as being records that are a genre that doesn't exist yet. And then even like Century Days is like so early into grunge, like it is kind of ahead of its time, So like they were just always trying new things, I think, and we're always on the edge of where everyone else is, which didn't seem to make them very successful in the moment. That's kind of my impression. But like people who know will go back and listen to those records and point to those records as being like, they were doing this stuff like way before anybody else, So that's my kind of existing knowledge about them. Other than like for a really long time, I just grouped them in with that second wave of American hardcore.
Yeah, I always lump them in with stuff like Battalion of Saints and Articles of Faith, and even a lot of the Chicago bands. All the bands that like started like after the first batch. Yeah, even like TSOL, which at this point actually do kind of sound a little bit like TSOL. They have a lot in common at this stage.
Yeah.
TSOL is another weird band that just kind of like sound different from record to record.
Yeah.
For better or worse. Yeah, so sonically, like I said, it's hardcore, but really, it's weird hardcore. Is really how I would describe it.
Yeah.
So the stuff you have here, you have the hardcore stuff, you have the second wave stuff on this list, but you have some of the weird stuff too. So what is the closest we can get with an also ran with Die Kreuzen?
That's the thing that I was looking at this chart, at the Rate Your Music chart for hardcore in 84, Articles of Faith.
Yeah. Vic Bondi, right? Still out here doing it. New Vic Bondi band in 2026.
And Black Flag is in their fucked up weird phase.
Yeah.
So
3 albums in 1 year.
There's a lot of stuff on My War and Slip It In that you could compare to this Die Kreuzen record.
The weirdness of SST makes a lot of sense. Die Kreuzen would have fit on the SST catalog very easily, especially in this period of SST, where you got a lot of like weird acid funk bands.
Yeah. So 2 very notable records that I didn't mention earlier, Minutemen's Double Nickels on the Dime and Husker Du's Zen Arcade, came out the same day
Yeah, which I didn't realize until this week. I saw someone post that, like, these two records were released on the same day. And I was like, I don't think I knew that. You did, but I didn't. So I thought that was kind of funny.
And sonically, Die Kreuzen maybe has something in common with early Husker Du.
Yeah.
Less so than Arcade, but there's elements of that early pure hardcore Husker Du there.
They were buddies with Husker Du, though. They played with Husker Du like multiple times a year. Every single year they were a band until Husker Du broke up. So like they were close. I mean, Milwaukee and Minneapolis there was a connection there, you know. Different states, but there was a connection.
Minutemen also put out The Politics of Time.
Yeah, it's like a comp.
Yeah.
Bunch of reactionary stuff on that record. It's interesting. It's not essential Minutemen listening though.
And I would say Minutemen and Husker Du are very similar to Die Kreuzen in spirit.
Mm-hmm. Especially the way, you know, you mentioned the early Minutemen, especially like the Punchline era.
Yeah.
Very similar style of song is how I would describe it. And play, you know.
But they were bands that were pushing the envelope, that were trying new things, that were drawing from a lot of different places, that had open minds and like were just very driven by artistic expression, you know. I think that Die Kreuzen is in that category of band. And that's kind of at odds with hardcore, especially throughout the rest of the 80s as hardcore does develop more into, you know, New York hardcore taking over so much crossover. You know, it becomes much more meat-headed as the genre goes on. And so these bands being active at the same time is like, these are kind of, Husker Du and Minutemen were definitely big bands at the time. And even Black Flag, you know, was trying to push boundaries. I think they were not nearly as successful.
Yeah, their boundary pushing just made, like, not fun to listen to music. Whereas Husker Du and Minutemen did make fun to listen. I mean, there's stuff that's not fun on their records, but as a whole, their boundary pushing, I feel like, was better than Black Flag's boundary pushing.
Negative Effects put out their self-titled record. I'm very hazy on Negative Effects. Boston band, very abrasive.
Yeah, I think that's it's like a weird, like, it's Boston hardcore, but also abrasive, like, weird hardcore. Like, kind of like Void, but not really.
And they were on Tang Records.
Yeah, most everybody was in Boston.
So that, I feel like, gives it... Yeah. Tang having Moving Targets and Slapshot.
And the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones.
It's just...
And the Proletariat. Weird label, too. Angry
Coxbarer.
Samoan. I think Angry Samoans are on Tang, weirdly. Like a reissue or something.
Yeah. Yeah. Strange. Yeah, like I said, Articles of Faith put out Give Thanks. Battalion of Saints put out Second Coming. Battalion of Saints, though, is like street punk.
Is it? I know we've covered both of those bands, but we covered their EPs and they were early. So I don't even know what their actual records are like.
They were a San Diego band, so that also makes them weird.
Yeah.
They also were signed to Tang. At some point.
Tang's weird.
Fang put out Where the Wild Things Are, and that's another band that I'm always just like, what's their deal?
What's the deal with Fang?
They were a California band. They were like Berkeley.
Okay.
And then, like, I've heard some Fang stuff. It's kind of noisy. It definitely feels like a similar sort of like druggy flipper noise rock kind of thing.
Yeah. That makes sense, because Berkeley, it's not that far, right, from San Francisco? And that's where Flipper were. But,
you know, in terms of, like, really being able to put my finger on, like, what is Die Kreuzen doing on this record that feels contemporary? Because, like, all of those all feel like a stretch, sonically, to me. Like, my case is, for almost all of these, are just being that they're stretching the definition of hardcore in this time, but what this Die Kreuzen record actually sounds like particularly the vocals is what kind of led me down this path. But there's some other things. Was like, they're doing harsh metal vocals.
Yeah. Yeah.
Before anybody in 84. So I was like, what is metal doing in 84? New wave of British heavy metal is still a thing. Power metal is kind of becoming a thing. Thrash is a thing, but thrash is mostly just like, Metallica style vocals, Celtic Frost is probably the most extreme metal band in 84. They put out Morbid Tales. They also appear on a 4-way comp called Death Metal, which includes no death metal bands. They were known as Hellhammer at the time before changing their name. And then there's like 3 other bands called Running Wild, Dark Avenger, and then Halloween is like, they're like a power metal band.
Yuck.
Is on there.
Halloween suck.
Yeah. And then Voivod put out War and Pain, and vocally Voivod are more like a thrash band. But musically, I do feel like there's a lot of weird chords on this Die Kreuzen record that are very similar to Voivod, kind of guitar chords.
I'm glad you mentioned Voivod because there was an article I read that was talking about, there was nobody who sounded like Die Kreuzen. Well, except Voivod. That was always the description of them. And it's like, yeah, that's it. They're technically different genres, but they sound weird in the same ways.
They're and they're coming from it, like from totally different directions. And I don't know, maybe Voivod was listening to Die Kreuzen, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know Voivod very well.
But like, they're Canadian.
Is it something about being cold?
And yeah, I mean, they both have their debut records in the same year. So it feels like railroad time.
Yeah. The record was released on Touch and Go in 1984. Not a lot. We have Butthole Surfer, Psychic, Powerless, Another Man's Sack. What are we doing with this band? This was their debut album. We have Tesco V and the Meat Crew, which is just the Meatmen. They just called it that instead of the Meatmen. They had an EP called Dutch Hercules, and then a band called Flesh Columns from Canada. They're just kind of like, they're just tagged as a Canadian punk band. I don't know much about them. And then producer Corey Rusk, he doesn't have anything else from 1984. He wasn't a big producer. I feel like the band probably produced it just as much as he did. So. Let's get into the story. So, originally, Dan Kubinski and Brian Edgeness formed a band in Rockford, Illinois in 1981. And they originally went by the name The Stellas. And not long after that, the entire band moved to Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I think it's kind of weird that they moved from Rockford, Illinois, and they went to Milwaukee instead of Chicago, which is just right there. Or Minneapolis, which was a bigger scene. So it is kind of interesting that they went to Milwaukee. But this is where they meet Wisconsin natives Keith Brammer and Eric Tunison. So they met through the local scene, and the Stellas had lost a new drummer, and Keith recommended his friend Eric because they'd played in bands together before, and he thought he would be a good drummer. And soon after, their bassist then left the band, and then Keith joined the band. And this lineup is the only Die Kreuzen lineup. These 4 guys stay Die Kreuzen. They changed their name. They took it from a German Bible, and it's supposed to be meaning the crosses. At one point they were called the Cows, but I don't think they didn't really do anything with that. The crosses is also, it's grammatically incorrect German. That's not how you would say the crosses, I don't think. But yeah, it's kind of funny. And the Milwaukee scene at the time was pretty small. It was pretty close-knit thanks to being such a small scene. And it really, when I read about it, it feels very similar to the early CBGB's days where punk was like really, really first beginning. And it was like this bohemian and like art people. It was just a lot of people kind of forced in the scene together who all had very different interests in like the type of music and art that they were, taking in and creating on their own. So it's just kind of like a weird little town for punk music. And it just kind of forced everyone to be a little bit closer together in a way that maybe they wouldn't have if it was a bigger city like Chicago or even Minneapolis. And they also say that the macho energy of like the bigger scenes didn't exist in this scene because it was such a small scene. You couldn't really start fights in the scene because what are you going to do then? There's literally nothing else left if you do this. So it was an interesting scene. A lot of different personalities and types in a small kind of scene. So they didn't have a lot of other bands that came out of it that were super well known. Really, at this stage, it would take quite a while for Milwaukee to get bigger. But the band did release their self-titled demo in 1982, and then they had some songs and some comps, and then they put out their debut EP, Cows and Beer, in 1982 as well. That was released on Version Sound. And then not long after, they wind up signing to Touch and Go Records. Touch and Go, as a label, originally started in Lansing, Michigan by Dave Stimson and Meatmen vocalist Tesco V. Weird timing update. Dave Stimson died last week. We had actually already selected this record to discuss, and then I saw the story about Dave passing away. So it's kind of weirdly fitting that we're covering it, so close to his death. But I don't know how much he was involved with the label operation after this, but the label was initially known for putting out music by the Necros, the Meatmen, and Negative Approach. Corey Rusk of the Necros would then join the label to help Tesco V operate it. So I don't know how much Dave was involved, but it seemed like Tesco and Corey were really the ones running the label at this stage. So the band goes into the studio at Multitrack Studios in Michigan, and Corey produced it, as well as with engineer Rick Canzano. And this album is 21 tracks long, with several of these songs originally released on the Cows and Beer EP. And the album is 30 minutes. It was released on vinyl and cassette, and then reissued on CD sometime in the late 80s, early 90s, with October File. So they were released simultaneously on CD, meaning the same disc. And Keith Bremer and Dan Kubinski also played in the band Boy Dirt Car at the same time, and they had a cassette release that year called Catalyst. And Boy Dirt Car was like a noise industrial band. One thing I was reading about the Milwaukee scene at this time, it was very collaborative, and all the bands had like the same people in it, which kind of really reminded me of a lot of the DC scene at the time. But a lot of crossover, probably due to the limited size of the scene. But yeah, I'll stop there. But what did you think of Die Kreuzen's self-titled record?
So I enjoyed it. I think it's a really interesting record. I didn't love it, and the thing that ultimately keeps me from really loving it is I couldn't really grasp any of the songs. I was just thinking how cool it sounds the whole time, but it's just how it sounds. It wasn't like, oh, I like that chorus, or like, that's a great riff. Like I'm not like sucked into it in that way in terms of like the actual music itself. If you were to change the production in some way, or, I don't think it would necessarily have the impact that it had. So it was it's just kind of frustrating in that way. Like it's a record that like I hear it, and especially if I think about when it came out and what they're doing, if I actually liked the songs themselves more and could recall them, I would say this is an amazing record.
Yeah, I'm in a similar boat. I think this is a really cool sounding record. I like the sound of everything. I like the style of song they're writing. I like the stuff they're doing. I don't mind the production. It's not too rough around the edges for me. I like the packaging. I love everything about this. I like this as a concept. As an album, I don't love the record. And it's for similar reasons. It is very samey. A lot of the songs sound the same, and a lot of the songs are all the same kind of like that's like the whole song will be like the same repeating bass line kind of over and over again. Like I said, it's a really cool sound. Like everything sounds cool. The guitars sound weird and cool. The bass is really strong and forward in the mix. It's like weird drumming, weird vocals, especially for the time. Like everything, artwork rocks. Everything's cool about it. But in some ways, it's too long, which is funny to say about a 30-minute album. But this is still 80s hardcore, and this like fast-paced version of hardcore should not be 30 minutes long. It should be a shorter 20-minute album. I think 20 songs is way too many songs too, because so many of them sound the same. A lot of the songs they re-recorded from the EP for this LP, I wouldn't have done that. I would have just left all those for the EP and then just put the new songs on this record. I think that's what they should have done. I think it would have been a little shorter. It probably would have been a little bit more brevity to it. My thinking was, if the Punchline by the Minutemen was a 30-minute album instead of like an 11-minute record like it is, it's short. Like it shouldn't even be on an LP. It's that short of an album. But like if the Punchline was a 30-minute album, it wouldn't work for me. The same way this doesn't work for me. If this was like 20 minutes, I think we'd be doing pretty good. If we were like 15 songs instead of 20, I think we'd be doing pretty good. I think it would make it a little bit more palatable as an entire piece of music, because that's kind of how I feel when I listen to this record. I don't pick out individual tracks there's a couple that stand out on their own, but it's usually the ones that are like slower. That's usually the only reason why it stands out. But yeah, it's too many songs doing the same kind of thing, and I think it just kind of wears by the end of the record, which a length of an album isn't so much as important as its pacing, and I don't think it's paced very well. That's my ultimate takeaway. Like, I love everything else about this, except maybe the songs themselves.
I can see that. Yeah. 30 minutes really isn't that long.
No.
For a record. But the material being as similar as it is, yeah. I think that is... You could have easily split this in half and had 2 long... You could still call them records, too, because they would be like 10 songs each.
Yeah.
Like, you could put this A-side out as one album, and then the B-side out as a second album, and they would have had more impact, because then it would be even more so a case of, this is a genre that doesn't exist yet.
Yeah.
Right, because these songs are like a minute long. Like, the harshness of it, and I think if some of these songs were played faster, you could call this a power violence record. And grindcore doesn't even exist yet, and that's what's so cool about it when you really take it apart. It's the exploded view of Die Kreuzen that is like, that's amazing. That's so cool. Pressing it all together, though, compacting it down into one listening experience. Yeah, as an album, it feels too much the same. Even though in that like intellectual sense, this is unique. This is a one-of-a-kind record for this time period. I mean, like, prior to this, what's the most extreme thing that hardcore has done as a genre? I mean, Bad Brains had the speed.
Yeah.
I mean, what? Discharge. So we've got D-Beat is kind of a thing prior to this. But that still feels grounded in a way that this record doesn't.
When does the Faith Void split?
The Faith Void split would be...
Is that 85?
82.
Oh, okay. I hear Void.
Void. But even then, like, that Void side of the Faith Void split is like, one of those tiny little things that launched 1,000 ships.
Yeah.
It's been cited, and rightfully so, given its credit for what it influenced. Very much in the way that, like, the B side of My War,
Yeah.
And that's where it's like, well, Die Kreuzen should be right there. But I don't think they got cited as references. Not until, like, Kurt Cobain is wearing Die Kreuzen shirts.
Yeah.
And that's, like, after they'd already turned into an alt-rock band.
I mean, there's still Chicago. Chicago's has several noisy things by this point already.
Yeah.
So that's a similar spirit. There was No Wave by this point in New York as well. That was happening. Yeah. But I don't think they're taking from No Wave.
No, it doesn't.
That was a lot slower. But they had the Industrial Side Project at the same time.
Yeah.
They do say, I read a couple different interviews, and they did say that, like, everybody listened to different stuff.
Yeah.
Like, everybody in the band was like, they all had different interests. They had a couple things they had in common. They weren't like Botch, where the only band any of them had in common was Helmet, and they all listened to completely different things. They listened to some stuff together, but as far as like what they were influenced by and what they were bringing to the table was different from each other, which is also why every record sounds different. Like every record from this band sounds like a completely different sound. And Die Kreuzen are almost a band where it's like hard to even talk about albums specifically. It does feel like a catalog band that you should be looking at in full because of the changes from every single record, yet maintaining the same 4 guys in the band the entire run.
I just Googled this because I was curious who cites Die Kreuzen as an influence. Voivod actually does. Specifically, by name. They've said Die Kreuzen was a huge influence early on.
I see it. Yeah, I see it for sure. They are the most sonically in line with each other.
And the early Voivod stuff is a little bit more straightforward thrash. Like, the weird chords that come in a little bit later. Napalm Death and Melvins, I think, have both referenced them.
You see that from an abrasiveness? Because there is an abrasiveness to this band. But sonically, they don't really sound alike at all.
But the thing is, like, listening to this, like, I hear... Like, when I listen to this, what I think the next logical step in hardcore is from this record is, like, Rorschach.
And that's actually a ways away.
And that's a long time away.
Rorschach,
Converge.
Born Against. Yeah, that's a lot further away than where we are. Even
today is the day, you know?
Yeah.
And that's why, like, I hear this record and I'm like, this is light years ahead. Like, that alone makes it worth listening to this record and gives it like 2 stars. Just like 3 stars foundation. Like, I'm just like, this is so incredible for how ahead it is. It's like the stuff you hear on like early 70s Brian Eno records that are like, this is post-punk and punk isn't even a thing yet.
Mm-hmm. Thurston Moore was also a really big fan. I think Sonic Youth played with Die Kreuzen a lot. That might be more in the later days, though, because there was like maybe it's like a reissue liner notes where Thurston Moore writes it, and he said that at certain points, Die Kreuzen were the best band in the United States. So that kind of shows you how, which, again, I don't hear Die Kreuzen in Sonic Youth sound.
Yeah.
But it is the kind of weird thing that Thurston Moore would like.
I like Thurston Moore's taste. But I don't care about what he makes.
Thurston Moore, musical critic, I enjoy way more than, or historian, way more than any output he ever put out.
Yeah. To my own criticism of this record, I think a fair rebuttal would be listen to it more and become more familiar with its nuances. And I think this is a record that upon repeat listens, I would appreciate more. I know you typically listen to most of the records we cover on the show like 2 or 3 times.
Yeah, I shoot for 3. I usually do. Rarely I can only get 2 in. But most of the time I at least get 3. And then what's funny is I'll get 3 The third listen tends to unlock things that the first two listens don't reveal to me. I think it's because I know the beats of the record now, and I'm just now listening for the more uniqueness, the little things about each song that make them special. But oftentimes, it's when I'm doing the tracks for the editing and picking the songs out, is when I'm, all of a sudden, that's when I love the record more. It's funny. It really does feel like a fourth time around is what I need.
I think there's that, like, having to pick the best songs to give as examples probably, like, forces you to be like, oh, well, I remember this moment in that song. Yeah, I know I should listen to the records multiple times for this show in terms of, like, I don't know, for the sake of credibility. But I know my listening tendencies, and I used to listen to records multiple times within a short span before I would write a review. Whenever I was, like, writing reviews of records, I definitely was doing that then, and I don't think that it was like cramming for an exam where you remember enough, I could get my paper done.
Yeah.
But I never have had a lasting impact from forcing myself to listen to a record 2 or 3 times in a week. I think just it being so close together, I think ultimately, like, unless I'm doing the thing where I'm, like, listening to the record while I'm writing,
which is how I take my notes too.
That's where the stuff stands out. But I've been able to, like, listen to records for this show in a different mindset than I do when I listen to records other times. If I know I'm doing it for the show, I pay so much more attention to it. I don't know if other people are the same, have this kind of, like, it's like I can engage the active listening parts of my brain through willpower.
You could turn it on when you need it.
Yeah.
See, my listening habits for the show is more out of an act of necessity, because I don't remember shit. And so I have to listen to the record 3 times, because if I only did it like you did, listen to it 1 time, I wouldn't remember enough about the record to be able to talk about it. So I need the repetition just to, like, beat into my head of, like, okay, this is what's on the album and what I can actually remember.
And I do, to my own credit, I do typically skim the records kind of prior to recording.
I give I
just try to find the things that I like that stood out to me on the first listen. I go, okay, where was that? And then, like, I find them in those songs and kind of refresh them. But
yeah, the first listen for me is always, that's right after I pick it usually, and that's just to, like, get a baseline to be like, all right, here, what is it? And then the second time through is my note-taking listen, and that's where I write my notes while I'm doing the show notes, and then track notes as well. And then the third listen is what I do usually the day of the recording as the refresher going into it. And that third one is usually the most satisfying listen. Though I get the most stuff out of the second listen, because that's when I'm doing my active, close listening, where I'm, like, paying attention to what's happening on the records more. But yeah, the third one is just, like, so it's fresh enough in my mind when we talk about it. I can talk about it.
Yeah. For me, whenever I come back to a record months later, like, if I listen to this record next year,
you're gonna fucking love it.
I'll love it. Yeah, I'll be like, there's, like, every song is amazing, or something. I'll be able to, like, pick out all these, like, great things about it. And because I've done that. Like, we've definitely talked about records on this show, and then, like, I came back to it later organically, or, because I'm going through my year deep diving, and I'm like, oh, I remember liking that one. We did that on the show. I'll listen to that again. Or there's been times where I picked a record to talk about on the show because I had listened to it kind of passively in the past, like, one time, and I was like, yeah, I liked this record. I remember that. Let's do it on the show. And then we talk about it. I'm like, this is so cool. Like, so I need time.
Yeah.
But really, really.
You need more.
And I'm not going to get that in a week. I'm not.
Yeah. That's what I was going to say, because it sounds like your process, you need a longer span between listens to get the full body. Yeah. That does make sense. Because you hear things you didn't hear, usually, when you come back to a record later, or things you forgot. Yeah. As far as this record in particular, I like everything that they're doing as individual musicians. I like the guitar tone a lot. It's not even like a particularly heavy distortion on it. It's got a similar Minutemen brittleness to it. I don't know if that comes from... They were big Wire fans, so that could be where that comes from. The weird chords, of course, are very interesting. Interesting lead. A lot of weird leads on the record that are kind of like, if you're not paying attention, they're kind of buried. They have weird spots where you'll hear them. It's like, whoa, that's a weird, like, guitar not even really a solo, but it's just like, it's a strange kind of like guitar lead.
They did this very Gang of Four kind of anti-solo sort of tendency in the guitar leads.
Mm-hmm.
Like it definitely, it's like, it's not as technically proficient as like Bad Brains. It's not too dissimilar to early Bob Mould kind of lead guitar playing.
Yeah.
But it's also almost kind of like there's almost like this kind of jazz fusion sensibility to the guitar playing too, where it's almost just like a Sonny Chirac type of guitar player, where it's just like, man, that sounds bad, but cool.
But then they'll throw in weird stuff like No Time has this like Mediterranean kind of like surfy little lead thing going on in it. Did you get much Dead Kennedys out of this? Because I did in certain songs.
Yeah, a lot, especially the bass playing.
Yeah. There's one in particular. Which song is it? There's one that I was just like, that sounds like Too Drunk to Fuck. Like, that sounded just like that song. In School. Which I think is one of the EP songs from their 82 EP. Which would be closer to those Dead Kennedys records. I don't know if they cited Dead Kennedys as an influence, but I do hear a little of, it's Ray is the guitarist, right? East Bay Ray was the guitarist. And I do kind of hear some of his tone in the guitar tone here as well. But yeah, the bass has like there's one that's just like doodly doodly doo doo. It's just like, oh, that's straight up what Holiday in Cambodia, you know? But it wasn't the whole song, but it was just that one like progression down the neck. Dan's vocals are wild. These are like shrieky hardcore vocals, and we don't really have shrieky hardcore vocals in 1984.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, is like why I went to, kind of looking at metal, and even like, I don't know, like Celtic Frost at this time period is still, like kind of a thrash, kind of a new wave. They're not that extreme yet.
Yeah, Celtic Frost is a weird band too.
He's lower, and it's not like the shrieky thing. Really, like what the vocals are, it's like Chuck Schuldiner in Death, and he's not doing that until 87.
I mean, Steve Austin is definitely a comp that you could make as well. Today's the day. Dan does change his vocals though on the next record too. Like he goes lower. Like he doesn't keep this level of shriekiness. So it's just this one record. It is such a fascinating band in that standpoint, because it's like nothing sounds the same from album to album. Everyone does something different. Probably the most consistent element of their sound is just weird chords. Like that's the thing that's most common from record to record. I do wonder if like another remaster, or maybe more of another remix, if it would make some of those weirder, like buried guitar parts shine a little more. I feel like there's more weirdness here than you can even really hear.
Yeah. I would love to hear isolated guitar tracks from this record. Oh,
yeah. Especially like if they did any overdubbing, I want to hear that overdubbing, because that's where I think all the weird shit's at. Man, I wonder if there are. I don't know. Probably not. Not anymore. But maybe the next record, but not this one. Yeah, I think the pace of the record, it's too many songs with the same speed. And the times they do like throw out a slow song, those are kind of welcome, because like, ooh, we're changing up the monotonous of it. They basically stay a regional band for a couple years. They just tour primarily the Midwest. They would do some bigger tours, but not a ton of them. They kind of were just like the main places they played. Chicago, Minneapolis, Milwaukee. Like those are the main places for them. They were well regarded by people who heard them. Like everyone who heard them was like, this band's cool. This is different. This is really different. But I don't know how much exposure there was. They did get out to LA. Another way that they were also ahead of things is they were flannel guys. They wore flannel because in Milwaukee you had to, because they say the seasons in winter, the seasons in Milwaukee are like, or Wisconsin specifically, are like winter, almost winter, still winter, and I don't know what the fourth one is. But it was like 3/4 of the year it's just cold in Milwaukee. So
I imagine it's probably pretty similar to like what I've heard said about like Minneapolis, where it's like cold pretty much all year, and then
you get
summer
summer
is humid as fuck.
Yeah, but they said that like they wore flannel because it was a necessity. It's just like with the Pacific Northwest, where like everybody just wore flannel because it was, you had to. Where you lived, you needed to wear it to stay warm. And then they said that they went to LA for the first time and they were made fun of for wearing flannel because like it wasn't a style yet. And then like years later when grunge is all about flannel, they're like, kind of funny. It's like we wore it because it was man, we needed it. But
I mean, Mike Watt was wearing flannel.
True. But Mike Watt was very blue collar coded.
Yeah.
Even though I don't know that he's ever done anything but music. But like he wears like work shirts, he's good, Yeah, that was his style. D Boon's style was tattered t-shirts. That was kind of his thing. And George was tank tops. But yeah, it's just funny how they were ahead. But yeah, everyone liked them. They were like well liked, and they were supposedly like the nicest guys, which might be just a case of that, the Minnesota nice, the Midwestern nice. Just culturally, everyone's just kind of nice to each other, despite, them making this like almost fucked up sounding music. I did find a review. There were reviews written by it, but a lot of them are all like retroactive. This one is too, but I thought it was pretty tight. But this is from Trouser Press of all places. And it said, armed with an antagonistic attitude and a predilection for velocity, the band burns through 21 explosive songs, riffs, really, that are interchangeable but not redundant. The primary ingredient, hyperkinetic energy, remains constant throughout Die Kreuzen, but the riffs are all different and uncommonly well articulated. As loud and fast as these guys are, their playing remains crisp. Dan Kubinski's vocals, however, are utterly unintelligible. What works for Couch Flambeau does not fit so well here. Don't quite know what that reference is, but and that review seems to be kind of in the same place. There's just like it's 21 songs that are mainly riffs, and that does feel like is accurate. That's how you would probably describe each song, is like that's the song with this riff in it. Lyrically, it's interesting. It's a lot of songs, a lot of negativity in the lyrics. In school is kind of funny because it's just about being in school with jocks and hippies and how much they hate each other and they fight after school. There's a lot of songs about fighting as well. When they talked about how the Milwaukee scene, there wasn't fighting in the punk scene, but it seemed like there was a ton of fighting outside of the scene, which that makes sense. I bet there were a lot of rednecks in Wisconsin, jocks, preps that like did not get these weird art kids. So I'm sure that was pretty common.
Yeah, but they also probably served beer with lunch in the cafeteria, so...
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. There's songs about shitty people, a lot of songs about fights, songs about abusive parents. There's a lot of, like, just trying to survive lyrics, which is kind of interesting. There's a lot of songs that are about, like, things are bad, but we're just trying to make it through, is kind of the attitude of a lot of lyrics on here.
Well, Reagan era.
True. And I do wonder how much of... They say that being from Milwaukee didn't really impact them that much, but they were also like... But also maybe, when you're cold that much of the year, maybe that is something deep down that affects you in a way that you don't really think about. I wouldn't necessarily call the lyrics like gothic or nihilistic, but they did seem on the more negative side, though. But that's kind of hardcore in general. The artwork fucking rocks. This is one of the coolest fucking album covers ever. It's these like skeletal giant... I saw them described as dogs. They kind of look like cows to me, which would fit with the cow thing going on with their... It is dairy country after all. But they're like skeletal with like these sharp, pointy teeth, but they could be their ears, but they could kind of look like horns as well. They're like over what looks like broken down like mechanical stuff as well, like almost like a war or something along those lines. It's a cool cover to the point where I was like, I want a shirt with that on it. It's such a cool cover. It was done by Richard Cole, who did the artwork for every single Die Kreuzen album. He did all of their covers. And I think he was like a manager for them at some point too.
The artwork really reminds me of... Oh, what's that guy's name? Lane Smith. John Siska is the author, but Lane Smith, who did the Sneaky Cheese Man.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I can see that.
But also a little bit, especially like the contrast and like detail of the black and white reminds me of the artist who did the artwork for the Iron Giant book. I don't know if you remember the art from that book.
No, I don't.
His name was Andrew Davidson. He was like a British artist.
It has a little bit of brain drain quality to it too. The Ramones record, that painted cover. Yeah, I was literally looking up shirts. I don't know if they have any like official merch anywhere because their website doesn't have a merch store. But I was definitely looking at some like Etsy shirts to be like, that could be cool to have. Well, let me do some aftermath, and then we can wrap up. Unless you have anything else you want to say.
No, that's it.
Okay. So they go on to release 3 more studio albums. October File in 1986, Century Days in 1988, and Cement in 1991. October File is like the more gothic album. Century Days is like their grunge record, and Cement is a record no one cares about. That's the one record that people are just like, yeah. It was just kind of like, I don't know that record at all. The band winds up breaking up in 1992 after Brian quits the band. One of the main reasoning behind them calling it quits is they got to a point where they felt like they all had different ideas on where to go next, and they weren't overlapping enough for them to feel like it would work cohesively. And they said, well, instead of fighting and, disagreeing about what we do and going forward, why don't we just go ahead and call it quits? And they were all kind of like, yeah, because their worry was that if they continued and like they butted heads a lot, then they would start hating each other. And one of the positive things about them is they never seemed to have major problems with each other. They would argue in studio about ideas, but it wasn't like they didn't fight each other. They got along, and I like that they were like, we need to break up before we hate each other, which I thought was like a really cool thing for them to do, and smart. Some of the members of the band would start a new band called Chainfall. Actually, it would be everyone except for Brian. They all started a new band right after called Chainfall. They brought in this one dude to play guitar from Milwaukee. He hadn't done anything else. They played some shows, and then like after like a year or two, he was like, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to play in a band. And then he quit. And so then that killed that band. They played some more bands together. Eric and Dan played in a band called Fuckface. They all would have other projects. Nobody had any major projects, though, that came out other than Die Kreuzen was their main thing. They would reunite for a handful of shows in 2012 and 2013, but that's it. Dan did form a band called The Crosses that plays songs from the first 2 Die Kreuzen songs. From the first 2 Die Kreuzen albums. And they have written new music. They recorded stuff last year. So that's interesting. If that stuff comes out, I'd be very curious, because if they're only doing the first 2 records, if it sounds anything like them, I'd really like to hear what that is. But yeah, so that's mainly what we have here. I feel like there's a lot more story, but it's just record specific stuff. So who knows? One day maybe we'll tackle Century or some Century Days or something like that. But I don't know. No guarantees. Well, did we win?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I think we won for sure. What would you rate it?
Like a 3.5. But like talking about it, I already feel like I'm trending towards a 4.
I'm at a 4, and I think it gets that half star on Vibe. It's just cool sounding, and I think if their total package. Yeah, I think that's what gets me at a 4. I think if this album were in a, stood on its own in isolation and there were no other records, maybe I would keep it at like a 3.5. But yeah, I like what they're doing here, even if I don't love the songs. So. All right, well that'll do it. We appreciate each and every one of you for listening. I'm kind of curious what you all think of Die Kreuzen. I really don't know what our listenership thinks of Die Kreuzen. I'm sure a few of them think it's cool, but I don't know. I don't know how familiar they are to everyone who listens. So I'd love to hear feedback, your thoughts on Die Kreuzen. And, but we appreciate you. You can follow us everywhere on social media, @PunkLottoPod. Send us DMs. You can comment on everything. Oh, I thought about this. I haven't really run this by you, but I thought about opening up the Discord a little bit. I'm not going to make it like open invite, meaning like I'll just post an invitation link and people can just go to it. I'm not going to do that. But if you want to join the Discord, hit us up. Send us a message. I'll get you in. I don't want to post it openly because I don't want bots, and I don't want to have to like set up my own bot to counter other bots, and I just don't want to mess with any of that kind of stuff because I've been in other Discords that have that problem, and it's annoying, and I don't really feel like doing that. But if you want to join the Discord, shoot me a DM. There's some cool people in there, and it's been a little active this week. Some weeks a little slower than others, but yeah, more people might help it stay a little more active on slower weeks. But that's the main thing I'm going to plug right today. What do you got?
Let's see. Next week, as of this episode's going up, probably the 15th. So July 22nd, major awards. We're playing a show with Moviola at the Escondite in downtown LA. So you should come out. It's free, and it's a cool Chicago bar in Skid Row. But they have a parking lot, so your car will be all right. And hopefully there will be a single next month. I'm going to try to finish mixing it this month and get it scheduled for release. So there will be more details on that. Hopefully I'll have more details by the next time we record. We'll see how far I get on mixing, but
all right, that'll do it. Thank you all so much. We appreciate each and every one of you listening, and we will talk to you next time.
To order Punk, call the number on your screen. Rush delivery is available. Remember, this special offer is not sold in stores.